Venice Beach in Los Angeles. I'm here with my partner in Conspiracy of Love, Bobby Jones, who is in New York.
Hello, everyone.
We also, in New York, coming from the Upper West Side, we have Meredith Ferguson from Do Something Strategic. Hi, Meredith.
Hi,
nice
everyone.
to see you. Continuing our international roundup, we have Neil Barry in London from 21st Century Brands. Hello, Neil. And Jonathan Mildenhall from San Francisco joining us as well.
Hi.
And last but not least, Peter Latz from IEG, who's based in Chicago. Hi, Peter. How are you doing?
Greetings, everyone.
Thank you guys for making the time today. Thank you to everybody who is logging in at the moment. We started doing these around 4 weeks ago as a way to bring together the brand and nonprofit communities to figure out ways in which we could collaborate to help fight COVID-19 as well. Today, we've got a great session for you. We're going to kick off with Jonathan and Neil from 21st Century Brand. They work with folks like Pinterest, Mars, Headspace, Uber, and more to talk about their recent report on marketing through crisis, which is super interesting. Meredith is going to talk to us about Gen Z. DoSomething is an incredible social impact consultancy who have a depth of knowledge on young people and purpose. And they've got some really interesting nuggets to share from Gen Z's response to the pandemic. And then Peter from IEG, who are the leader in sponsorship insights and intelligence, is joining us to share some findings from the IEG Outlook, Future of the Sponsorship Industry. I know we have a lot of people from the sponsorship industry joining us today as well. Welcome to everybody. The format is we're going to have a series of 15-minute conversations right throughout. If you'd like to send us questions, use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen there. Bobby will be collating all the responses, and then the final 15 minutes we'll set aside to do like a roundtable Q&A so we can answer your questions. So keep them coming in right throughout as well. All of this will be recorded and sent out to everybody on the webinar directly afterwards. We will also share a Dropbox link with all three of these presentations so you can have them for future reference as well. All right, so let's kick off. Jonathan and Neil, I've been tracking the work that you guys have been doing for 21st Century Brand. You do remarkable work. Jonathan, can you just talk a little bit about how the idea for 21st Century Brand came about and what your kind of purpose and philosophy is?
Yeah, we, Neil and I set up 21st Century Brand after working together for 4 years at Airbnb. I was the CMO at Airbnb and Neil was Chief Strategy Officer for Chiat in LA. And Neil and I basically built the strategy and then the brand all around the world. And we realized that there were other companies of Airbnb's ilk that also were interested in building a classic marketing discipline and a classic approach to brand building. And so we set up the company, and we were very lucky in our first year because we were approached by Peloton and Pinterest and Uber Eats, Headspace, lots of clients that were born in this millennia that are actually looking to build purpose-driven brands. And our company works with founders and CEOs to really help them unlock the potential of their brand as far as cultural impact is concerned, not just the basic business plan. And it's been really interesting over the last couple of months because the paradigms of brand building have really been turned upside down, and we'll share a little bit about that as we get into our marketing through crisis white paper.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that context. Neil, first of all, how are things in London? What's the mood there as well? I feel like the BBC. Hello, London. Come in, London. Yeah. How is London?
I'm going to speak for 15 million Londoners. Yeah, it's. I think I'm grateful to be in London right now. No disrespect to the States, but I think that the kind of people have pulled together quite a bit. And actually, I sense in loads, and I hear it from lots of people, like local communities are pulling together all the WhatsApp groups. People are going to food banks more. There's obviously a lot of people being really impacted, but I feel after Brexit, I'm hopeful that in a weird way, it's kind of helping heal some of the polarization of Brexit. while also putting a lot of pressure on people. But I do feel like a sense of togetherness now that everyone's stopped talking about it as well, which is great. And it's now more figuring out something real versus something conceptual about how can they help out, how can they save their own careers, how can they help out their neighbourhoods, you know. So I actually think from London, I think we're fighting through.
Good. Well, let's jump in. You guys have done some fascinating work looking at what's going on with brands out there. And you have some great principles and advice on how brands should operate in this space. Just go right ahead, Neil, whenever you're ready to start sharing. Let's walk through it, and then we'll have a quick conversation at the end of it as well.
All right, great. I'll just...
Yeah, so for everybody who's joining, what Neil's going to share is just a real top line from a white paper that we distributed on different social media platforms. You can find it on LinkedIn, you can find it on Twitter. And we wrote this for our clients and for the VCs that are investing in our clients' business. And it was just as the pandemic started to hit, there was a kind of crisis of identity for a lot of brands. Should we divest from marketing? Should we lean into marketing? Should we lean into community action? And so we just wanted to be generous with our own thoughtware and issue a point of view. And I'm very proud to say that it's been embraced by organizations like Adweek, who have set up an initiative for brands to actually come together and partner in a very significant and interesting way, because actually through brand partnerships, brands can make an even bigger difference than acting on their own. And so this is just a distillation of some of the thinking. As ever, 21st Century Brand, we don't shy away from celebrating the very best, but also the very worst of brand action. So as Neil takes you through some of the principles, we'll also end with just highlighting a couple of brands that we think are doing really, really well, and a brand that actually should work a little harder.
All right, great. So I think, you know, the first thing was like, it became clear pretty quickly that this is like a defining moment for all of us. Like everyone who's on this call, like in the brand, it's a defining moment for many communities, including brand and marketing folks, and it's a moment for us and for the brands that we devote a lot of our time to building, probably too much time for a lot of you. And so, you know, because clearly this generation has never been through a kind of collective trauma like this. It's a different thing. Different people are being impacted in different ways, but everyone is being impacted by it in some way. And, you know, marketing was already really complicated. You know, it's already so much to balance. And now we're trying to learn a new playbook in real time without a roadmap. So really, we're just trying to look at what's happening to people's needs. What do people need right now? How they're changing? What should brands, you know, what does that mean for how brands should kind of behave and act, and who can we learn from? You know, those are the three things. So I'm just going to give you some headlines. You know, I think one of the reasons, you know, going back to it being a defining moment was, you know, there's a lot of talk around purpose, and this really is the time when people need brands to actually step up. This is a good statistic in a way that, you know, almost 2/3 of us think that their country won't make it through the crisis without brands playing a critical role in the fight. So that's like showing there is a genuine need there. Equally, most people don't trust brands. You know, only a third, these are both recent stats from Edelman, but they don't trust most of the brands they buy. So it's kind of quite a poignant moment. People really want to believe in brands and what we've got to offer, but most people kind of don't trust us either. And so it's kind of important what we do, that we really are thoughtful and think critically about what's really going to make a difference, against what's kind of more like sort of just looking for creative opportunities or doing things which are slightly gimmicky and self-serving. So to kind of help with that, you know, six principles to kind of follow. I think the first is obvious, but it's important. Empathy. People are tense right now. So much work. There's been great work done by Simpler, by Kodak, by the nursery, various research groups. People are really stressed right now. There's a lot of relationships under pressure, and they have different needs. So we've got to be very empathetic to that. Secondly, generosity is a huge thing. You know, we like it. We want brands to be mobilizing their assets and communities to help those who most need it and avoid expensive endorsements at the same time. And I think there's been some great examples of that, you know, whether that's like Spotify, you know, making it much easier for people to give to artists, for example, and giving a call to arms there. Third, I think utility and agility, like only doing things that add genuine value and constantly assessing what constitutes value, because what was meaningful at the start of this thing, maybe table stakes are even counterproductive today in terms of thinking critically about how can you really help, which is an important thing to embrace. Fourth, I think we're looking for acts, not ads. We obviously have to advertise as well, but I think well-meaning messages aren't really what's needed right now. Make a meaningful contribution, document the story, and you'll kind of get the eyeballs if it's worth talking about. So really thinking about it that way. And we've seen a lot of examples of people doing that. There's been some great things happening. Fifth, I think hands-on leadership. We want to see our leaders. We want to see our founders. We want to see our CEOs. We want to see our CMOs making a difference and not just marshalling their resources, but actually getting actively involved. And you've seen a lot of that, which has been, well, a bit of that, which is good. And we'll talk about that in a bit, some of the examples. And then finally, it's still about brands. You still trying to build equity, so you do it your way. Run your initiatives through the lens of your purpose and personality, so you're still adding long-term value. We are businesses. You have to make money. We have to drive preference still. So do it in a way which reinforces what you're best at, what you're good at. And I think we've seen some good examples of brands doing that. So that's 6 principles, and we go much deeper into them in a white paper, which we can follow up with anyone afterwards who wants to hear about them. I think one overall thing that's it's an interesting thing. This is really cheesy animation. I'm not going to stay away from that because it helps make the point. Invert the hierarchy of needs. Traditionally, we're kind of encouraged to go right to the top of the pyramids with our brands and really stand for very aspirational things and kind of stay away from the more functional bottom ends because they're more sort of hygiene factors. And I think that wisdom's been kind of turned on its head because these needs are so acute now. Jonathan, I'm going to let you rant a bit about this now.
Yeah, and I'm conscious of the time, so we've only got another 3 minutes, so we'll just headline this. For a lot of brand builders out there, what you're trying to do is find a quick way of having your brand get as close to the top of the whether you're a hair care brand, whether you're a cosmetics brand, or whether you're a fashion brand. Moving into self-esteem and self-actualization is established thinking. That's where all brands and great brands aspire to be. But actually, probably for the next 18 months, people aren't looking for brands to do anything other than reassure them of their physiological and psychological needs. And the highest place that a brand should potentially aim for is to create this sense of community, this sense of love and belonging. And it's going to be really interesting in this place next year, but looking at those kind of marquee marketing moments where the majority of activity is in self-actualization, self-esteem, that's just not going to be appropriate for the next 18 months. So pull it back and really, really focus on actually just making sure that you're helping people address some of these more near-term needs that they have for themselves, their families, and their local communities. Neil, we only have another 2 minutes.
It's all right. Take your time, guys. Keep going. Keep going.
All right, good. Thank you.
All right, cool. So that's a big thing, remapping those needs and then thinking about how you can play a meaningful role in addressing them because it needs, critical thinking. And I think some brands who have really thought about it, these are just some good examples for us. So first, Unilever, going to the point about really servicing what the kind of physiological belonging needs, safety needs. One of the first things they did out of the gate was change their supplier terms and payment terms and reduce them. That's a huge act, which shows amazing empathy with their community. Brands talk a lot about their communities. That's genuinely helping people who need it. And then they've also done obviously really creative things. They've continued the work they've been doing on hand washing, which is like 100 years for them. They're doing it in a very ambitious global way, working with the UK government. Lifebuoy been doing some cool things, promoting other brands as well. So that's a brand that's really thought critically and doing a through the line kind of purpose-driven contribution here. Another brand, and we know well, Headspace. Really stood up and delivered, and I've moved very quickly to kind of realize that they could really help us provide essential services. They're normally quite a premium service. Suddenly you had Headspace partnering with the NHS in the UK to make sure that every health worker had access to all Headspace services, partnering with Cuomo in New York, partnering with Michigan, and suddenly making their services available to lots of people who need it. And as a brand, it's an act of generosity, but it's also a very important moment for them. They're kind of finding their moment, they're finding their time, and it will, there will be a long-term benefit from them. But it's all still very much on what they can deliver. So they're another great example. And then a final one, Pinterest, who are a brand we know very well, and they're all about inspiration. They're the world's inspiration company, and they moved very quickly to launch a new Inspiration Today tab, knowing that people were suddenly turning to Pinterest more and more, and providing useful inspiration for every day. So whether it's coronavirus advice from experts or inspiring home spaces. And so that was very much through the lens of what they're about, but making it very timely and relevant now. And then equally, it was interesting to also see, like, talking about leaders stepping up. Their CEO, Ben Silverman, actually then worked with a group of scientists to launch a new self-tracking app, which can provide data to all US medical authorities which can help them track COVID and monitor the symptoms. So if anyone's on this call who's in the States, download it and use it. And it's a great example of, not only was he doing that, but he's actually leading from the front in terms of doing a pretty amazing side hustle. So we're very proud of them and what they did. And then, so finally, I think a brand that perhaps didn't get it right out of the gates was Coca-Cola, I think. One of the immediate things was the logo distancing, which a lot of brands have chosen to do. And I think, there's good things about that. There's also debatable things about that, of it's whether it's serving a purpose. But I think maybe it was confusing putting it in Times Square, a messaging about social distancing, which is one of the busiest places in the world. And they paused marketing in the UK after that as well. So it didn't feel as kind of a confident, thought through response in the way that some of the other three that we've talked about, really thinking critically about what's needed and how still to build their brands at this time. So I think that they're maybe not an example to learn from on this occasion. And then just to finish off, really, the coolest thing, we always want to be cool in culture with brands. The coolest thing any brand can do right now is be helpful. Put your hand up, do something, and that will if it's thought through and inventive, it'll play you right. So that's really our kind of final message, which is pretty simple.
I'd like all listeners to just think, just ask themselves this question. We know that businesses are under pressure to navigate this in a financially responsible way. But rather than as a marketer, somebody who's steering a brand, go, how can I sell right now? Ask yourself the question, how can you help? And if you help in a very authentic and tangible way, then you're going to sell. And the best brands that will be held up as real emblems of steering this global psychological pandemic that we're all facing with are the ones that really, really understood the commercial benefit of being helpful. Thank you.
Love it. Thank you, guys. Very insightful. And I want to segue into Meredith now, because what's really interesting in the report you're going to hear from Meredith and on Gen Z is how much they want brands to ask them to help, how much they want to co-create platforms as well, together with brands, which I think provides a really interesting opportunity for the brand to, as we say, be the helper, not the hero. So Meredith, why don't we go to you? And first of all, just tell us a little bit about what is DoSomething Strategic. I'm a big fan of what you guys do, but please explain to everybody else what it is. And you may need to take yourself off mute.
Damn it, I'm one of those. Sorry. DoSomething Strategic is the social impact consulting arm of DoSomething.org. And DoSomething.org is the largest tech platform for young people and social change. DoSomething.org has over 5 million members in every single area code, and 100 in the US and 131 countries worldwide. And so we have over 5 million members that we talk to every single day. We text with nearly 3 million young people every week. So we hear from them every day on sort of what they care about and how they're taking action more broadly. And so as a social impact consultancy, we're able to really leverage those insights, leverage that really deep understanding of who young people are, how they behave, and what they expect of brands, and really connect with brands and organizations, nonprofits too, like Pink, Nike, PwC, Habitat for Humanity, and really help them understand how they can build a deeper relationship with young people.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I love the work you guys do. You got some fascinating research to share with us. Why don't we dive in and keep those questions coming in right throughout? We'll answer them at the end.
Cool. Let me share my screen here.
And by the way, yes, we will be sharing all of these decks right after the call. We'll send it out to everybody via Dropbox link.
So we've been sending out to our members every single week a survey that's just wanting to touch base with how they're feeling, how they're doing, how this is impacting them. And we've gotten thousands of respondents every single week. We're in week 6 now, to every survey representing every state in the country and beyond, and all ages. And when I say member, it's someone who has given us a means to communicate with them one-to-one or one-to-few. So generally that's by text, but also by email. And they're between the ages of 13 and 25. And so we really keep our finger on the pulse of this crew, and they've told us a lot. And each week we're asking about how they're feeling, why they're feeling that way, of course, how this is impacting them, what they're doing to keep busy, entertained, to cope, what they're surprised about, where they're finding joy, how well they think the government is responding, both nationally, locally, schools, how this is really impacting their thoughts and intentions around the upcoming elections in the US, and what they expect of brands. And that last one is what we'll touch on today. And I think it's probably no surprise that week over week concern remains high. I can tell you just this last survey, the number was still at around 91%. And the reasons center around all the things you can expect: health, the risk of spreading it, the risk of getting it, the risk of their loved ones getting sick, and certainly the economic impact as well. And that is actually increasing as a reason for concern among them. And of course, how long this is going to last. That's a big one. And so while there aren't a lot of new concerns coming up each week, the way that Gen Z is talking about these concerns really does feel like it's shifting from more sort of hypothetical to, which is sort of what we were seeing in those first few weeks as to be expected. And now you're just seeing the concerns kind of shift to this more firsthand experience, and more people knowing someone who is sick, or, school impacts are now set in stone, and they're kind of trying to figure out what next steps look like and what's really in jeopardy here, and really just concern about how bad things are going to get, and how long this will all last. So it's not surprising to see that young people have great anxiety around this, as we all do. They're not unique in that, but they're unique in their experiences around that. And so we wanted to know, back when the country was first put on shutdown, we asked on March 24th, well, what do you believe the role of brands should be in light of COVID-19? And the top 2 answers overwhelmingly centered on sort of taking care of your employees, ensuring safety, closing stores, offering delivery, and protecting employees financially, right? Like providing paid sick leave, avoiding layoffs. And you'll see this later, this priority of taking care of your employees still remains true. So really important to understand what they're really expecting of brands, and it's more internal than you might think. And this young people are paying attention. And not surprisingly, a significant majority of young people are saying that this pandemic has impacted their purchasing decisions. I can tell you 58% say it's had a significant impact. And again, this isn't unique to Gen Z necessarily, but it is interesting to see how Gen Z is sort of saying that some of their decisions are impacted by how a brand actually is behaving, which is exactly what Neil and Jonathan were speaking to. They're watching, they're paying attention, and already 23% have stopped purchasing a brand because it hasn't taken action in a way that they desired, and they're not behaving in a way that is how they would expect or aligns with their values. And nearly half have bought or plan to buy from brands that are taking action in the right ways. So it's important to understand that young people are watching, and the sort of cancel culture is real, and they're not afraid to sort of use their dollars to show their feelings. And so we wanted to know more. We kind of dug in a little bit and said, well, why don't you tell us some examples? 75% in this particular week, it was over 3,000 respondents, 75% could name a brand right away that they loved more because of the brand's response to the COVID-19 crisis, from taking care of their employees to donating financially, providing needed supplies. All of those things matter. And Topshop's that were mentioned were sort of local mom and pop places, local breweries, for instance, for making hand sanitizer, or some of their favorite local restaurants for giving out free food to families who had been laid off. But certainly other national brands leveraged to the top. You can see this quote is from somebody who felt like Nordstrom, really made their list for helping to produce masks. Many others mentioned Nordstrom. Crocs was a big mention, if you can believe that. They had given away 10,000 pairs of shoes every day to healthcare workers. So again, young people are watching, they're reading, they're paying attention, and they're talking. And then we said, well, can you name a brand that you like less? And in fact, they could. 47% could name a brand they liked less based on the brand's response to this crisis. And I think it's sort of summed up beautifully by this 18-year-old who's basically saying just any brand that keeps going as usual. It's so tone deaf. And when we drilled in a little deeper, 42% of the people who liked a brand less did so because of how that brand treated their employees. And while Walmart got some credit for keeping employees on payroll and protecting some benefits, they received an equal number of negative comments centered entirely around not protecting their employees better. It's fascinating to think a 19-year-old in Oklahoma is paying attention to this, but they are all over the country. And multiple respondents echoed this sentiment from this 22-year-old in Minnesota who called out Sephora. I mean, this news got around quick. And again, wow. I don't even know if this is true, right? But this is their reality and this is what they're talking about. And it's also important just to remain sensitive more broadly to what consumers are going through. You can really risk coming across as tone deaf or opportunistic. There are a number of call outs in this section around how brands sort of weren't responding in the way that they expected. And they were really losing favor among Gen Z for peddling sales prices when, or just going about their standard marketing, standard programming, kind of blatantly using this pandemic as a marketing sort of ploy rather than really understanding what's going on out there. Again, this is impacting Gen Z as much as it's impacting everybody else, and they're feeling it. And so they're seeing how brands are perhaps using this as a marketing opportunity, which is pretty poor. And we asked brands sort of how they should engage young people. Great, so that's how they want you to behave, but how do you expect them to engage young people? And again, taking care of employees remains a top priority for them. 67% want brands to keep them informed on how they're supporting their employees and their broader team, their supply chain partners, all of those folks that make up their enterprise. So really, really important. And they also want to know how brands are pitching in. I mean, I think Jonathan and Neil said it well. I mean, they are trusting the brands as well as government to sort of help out in this pandemic. And so they're asking you to keep them informed on what you're doing to make a difference during this crisis. And then the really interesting thing is the opportunity for brands to really invite consumers to take part. And this is the thing, and this is our whole point of view, right? Our whole point of view at Do Something Strategic is do something, and not just do it as part of the brand, but do it as part of your community. And what an opportunity. These are nearly half are saying, raising their hand and saying, I want to do something with you, brand. Help me get involved in finding a solution and helping out my community around me. And certainly we've seen initiatives like Lowe's sort of sent out that call to DIYers to make homemade thank you signs for healthcare workers. Steakums did a fundraiser for Feeding America, and very blatantly asked their community to follow along and chip in. ESPN, candidly, this is a campaign with DoSomething.org, but ESPN is doing a campaign with our organization around weekly asks of young people to everything from making masks to making posters. So there's so much more that brands could be doing in this space. And we're hard pressed to find enough brands that we can use as examples here. That I'll say for real. And what an opportunity to finally sort of create a community that's on something bigger than just your price and promotion. And with that, I'll sort of just end with community building. Meaningful engagements are absolutely business drivers and should be part of every brand's business strategy. You may have seen this CNBC interview of Chip Bergh from Levi Strauss, where he said that the brands that are going to win are going to be the ones that have deep connections with their consumers. And we could not sort of agree with that more. Brands who prioritized building a relationship with their consumers and created a foundation based on shared values by being more purpose driven are the ones that now have permission to talk to and engage their community beyond just their latest sale, right? We get it. You got to sell product. You got to push the percentage off in the promo. Yes, and launch that new product, of course. But when brands are only doing that, a crisis like this really shows you that they don't have the connections to really be vulnerable, to really be community driven. And I can tell you, your email list does not equate to your community, period. That is not what community is. Community is about, especially among Gen Z, they're telling us, it's about connection and belonging and a relationship, a two-way relationship. And so you see brands like Lush who are providing, which by the way is a huge Gen Z favorite. Lush is providing this very detailed ongoing update around their ordeal and how they're treating their employees, what they're doing. It's extraordinarily honest. It's incredibly transparent. And young people are appreciative of that. They're saying, yeah, they are saying, I'm part of your family and you're treating me like that. You're communicating with me like that. You see brands like Harry's who have long stood for, you know, a platform of mental health, and now they're able to leverage that and connect with their consumers, not just through like, you know, 2-for-1 razors, but they're able to say, hey, we've got 2-for-1 razors and we have a partnership with Crisis Text Line. We're here for you. Make sure you're reaching out and getting the help you need at this time. And here are 3 things you can do. And they have the permission to talk about mental health in a way that J. Crew doesn't. J. Crew's out there pushing sale after sale. I'm ready to see an email where they're telling me their fixtures are, you know, for sale. At some point, it's about really creating a community based on things that really matter beyond just price and product. And that is my biggest hope, is that coming out of this, that brands will see that yes, a short-term strategy is to drive those immediate sales. Yes, yes, yes. And a long-term strategy is to build a real community based on shared values, and that starts with purpose.
Amazing. Thank you, Meredith. Couldn't have said it, you know, more, couldn't 100% agree with you. I think what people are saying is we're getting to the point where they're saying to brands, help me find ways to help others, right? If you can give me something to do, whether it's sewing a face mask, like we've seen this wonderful stuff with Teeks, this shoe brand with hashtag sew together, or help me just do something while I'm sitting in the house, you know, to help other people who might need help. That is a huge opportunity for brands as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, amazing.
And that's always been the case, I'll say, just from our perspective with Gen Z. This is true. I can tell you that long before COVID, this was about 1.5 years ago, we did a study called Dollars and Change. And even then, 49% of brands or young people said, I want brands to engage me in ways that are meaningful. Give me things to do with you. And what an opportunity that few brands really take advantage of.
100%. We call it like acts of moral imagination. What is the thing the brand says, help us create this together to help this group of people, and something magical happens because you're helping those consumers tap into their purpose and to find meaning in the work that you're doing together as well. So yeah, highly recommend that previous report, Dollars and Change, as well. Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you.
Keep those questions coming in. We're going to go to Peter in Chicago now. Peter, tell us a little bit about IEG, just for those of you who don't know. It's a legendary name in the sponsorship space. But what is IEG? And then tell us a little bit about this report that you put together.
Sure. Well, first off, thank you, Afdel and Bobby, for the time, and to my fellow panelists as well for the time today. It's been interesting to kind of see the preceding content. IEG is a sponsorship consultancy that's been in business for close to 40 years. And our charge in the marketplace is a little bit different in terms of we sort of operate between brands and properties and help to provide insight and advisory around the commercial transaction of sponsorship. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit different than the preceding content, talk a little bit about the value equation that is occurring with what we're all experiencing in terms of COVID, in terms of value that's being essentially put on hold from a sponsorship perspective. But IEG has been in business since the early 80s. We like to think of ourselves as a bit of a thought leader in sponsorship, all the way from the top levels of sport down to your local road races.
Great. Well, let's dive into the super interesting data that you guys have collected. And I know there's lots of folks from the sponsorship community out there. Please keep the questions coming in. Peter will get to them in after this presentation in a bit.
Sure. So let me give cyberspace a minute to catch up. Is that coming through, Afdel?
Yep, coming through loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay. So in terms of forecasting the future, I wouldn't be on this webinar if I was able to forecast the future, but I do think that, we took a little bit of some time early on in the process to really try to get an understanding of how brands and properties are perceiving this essential full stoppage of the live experience. So the first reason why we did this study was primarily guidance. There are so many unknowns right now that we felt like it was a good idea for us to get an understanding of how brands and properties are talking to each other, not talking to each other. We got a lot of clients calling us saying, what are you hearing? I think everyone is really exchanging information. How did we do it? We issued online surveys to about 600 top sponsorship buyers and sellers. There were no agencies involved in the process. We did not capture where they were from or who they were. We sent it out to a good number of people across the full spectrum of sports, really trying to cover sports and cause and entertainment, really trying to cover the commercial lens of sponsorship. So it was really important for us to kind of take a view of how the industry is going to come together in this sort of reset that I think we're all going to experience. And it was said earlier that this is a defining moment, and it's certainly commercially defining moment as well in terms of what we're dealing with. So based on the findings of the survey, we sat down and did an interview with Sahil Patel from CMO Today at Wall Street Journal, and it featured the perspectives of both brands and properties. The article lays out the challenges and the opportunities that we're going to really kind of get involved in. And really, quite frankly, without sounding too dramatic about it, this is going to be the largest value realignment that I think we have seen in our lifetimes relative to the commercial side of sponsorship. So it's really important to get a really good understanding of what we found in terms of the learning. So let's get into some of the details of what we found. So firstly, I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of value that isn't being lost necessarily. It's really quite literally on hold. So what we wanted to do was size that impact. And the way we did that on the left here is that we made an estimate that about $10 billion of rights fees that have been paid in return for value will need to be made up. This assumption is based on a 6-month shutdown, a 1-to-1 return ratio on value paid, and an estimate that about 80% of the valued assets are essentially suspended. Moving over to the right of the slide, not only is the financial impact fairly wide, it's affecting everyone. There's about 120,000 active sponsorship agreements that are being impacted or on hold across 5,000 distinct sponsors. So what starts to happen here for me is this is where we see the opportunity for a reset, right? I think that the industry has an opportunity to become very creative, to innovate, and to be flexible. And I think we're learning this in our personal lives. We are really having to lean into this sort of base notion of relationships. In fact, we received a lot of very insightful verbatims from the folks that we queried for this survey, and they are telling us we have to switch gears. We have to listen to each other. We have to realize that this isn't personal, it's business. And it's happening not because of non-performance. It's happening because you were unable to perform the sponsorship that was contemplated originally for the brand. So it's really important to kind of keep that human element involved, even though we're kind of talking with a commercial lens here. One of the largest tensions that we observed is around timing. And I think we're all dealing with that at home as well. So we kind of look at the left-hand side of the slide here. This is a perpetual state of suspension. I think everyone feels like every day is the same. We have jokes around that with Blur's Day and renaming all the weekdays. But brands essentially have the advantage here. And the reason why they have the advantage is because they're able to pivot to other areas of the marketing mix. They can shift assets around. They can change back to above the line. They can change messaging. They can lean more heavily into social and digital. So in their cases, they want to wait, right? The properties seem to have fewer options from the highest level of sport all the way down to, again, a local road race. They don't really know. They're in this state of suspension. There's nothing that they can really do until they know the fate of their year. So what that's doing is it's causing this time frame to keep extending itself. And close to 90% of the respondents believe it's going to be 3+ months before anything goes back to what it was, with almost 40% saying that it's going to be longer than 6 months. Now, one of the important pieces here is a way we asked this question was around this idea of normalcy. We've heard a lot of new terms that are coming out because of COVID, the new normal, the future normal, the next normal. I don't think anything is going to go back to normal in terms of this conversation. I think it's going to be, again, a realignment and a bit of a reset. Where we did see some alignment in terms of both of the two groups of respondents agreeing with each other was really kind of around that this is a wholesale reanalysis or reevaluation around spending, around the way sponsorships are structured, around the way contracts are written to contemplate future occurrence, and even the reconciliation. We know that the reconciliation, as we're calling it, is going to need to happen on a case-by-case basis. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to how people are going to reconcile this differential. Not surprisingly, this point down here on the bottom is that we are seeing a lot of agreement on an increased reliance on social, digital, and branded integration. This is primarily because obviously these elements of the marketing mix generally are insulated from the volatility of the live experience. I don't think anyone contemplated volatility in a live experience outside of attendance going up or down, or teams winning or losing. But ultimately, we have seen in the past, social and digital have taken sometimes a backseat to the live experience. And I think that's a trend that's going to shift as we come into a new normal. Most of the tensions that we saw were obviously financial related, right? The reconciliation and the value gap, as we're calling that, it is going to need to happen. It's not going to take forever. It's not going to be a lingering issue, but there's a bit of a statistical difference between the properties agreeing that all the lost sponsorship value is going to be made up, and there's intent there. The brands are really feeling a little bit less certain about that. And that leads kind of to the middle of this slide, which is that obviously, and this is no surprise or should be no surprise to anyone, the properties are going to work like heck to try to retain the cash that they have from brands. And the brands in some cases are going to be forced to get money back. So there are going to need to be relationship-driven, partnership-driven conversations. And in the verbatims that we took, some of the brands were actually concerned about hurting the relationships that they have with their properties by asking them for money back, which was really interesting to us as we analyze the results. And then finally on the right here, and this goes to the point on the earlier slide, that half of the properties basically said, I have to start over. Whereas the brands did not agree to the same level, obviously, because they can pivot. They can move their stuff around. They can go on television. They can go above the line. They can go to social and digital. The properties are rooted in the live experience, and the live experience is on hold. So there's a bit more of an overhaul happening there. So we did ask both groups what they are interested in terms of make goods. The brands, obviously, at the top 3 level, they want the things that we're talking about, the fact that we're going to lean into more heavily: social media, branded content integration. Traditional advertising is seeing a comeuppance here. And then the third one is an activation fund, which I call a cash deferral, right? Those are the 3 most important things that brands said, if I had to take a make good now, these are the things that I would take. On the right-hand side, obviously, it's a little bit all over the place in terms of what the rights holders are able to offer. Their options, as we've talked about up until this point, are a little bit more variant. So this was an open text field in the survey. In certain cases, there's a conversation here about whether or not these elements are the same value as what was originally contemplated in a sponsorship agreement. And that's where relationships hopefully will rule the day, and there won't be a lot of issues that happen coming out of contractual resolutions. So kind of wrap things up here, the top concerns of the decision makers outside of the obvious ones, right, which are spending, industry job loss, and the length of the downtime. Consumer sentiment is a big one, right? There's a big one is that we could open everything up tomorrow. Take Georgia, for example. Georgia's reopening its state, but a lot of consumers aren't totally sure that they're ready. So this consumer sentiment idea is going to happen with large public gatherings. It's going to happen with travel, both business and personal. So consumer comfort about attending events and running your life the way you used to is a big concern for the industry, as are scheduling conflicts, right? There's just going to be like a sports fan's dream in fourth quarter and first quarter of next year. If all of the things that we say are still going to happen end up happening, there's going to be a lot of sports happening on television, events happening, et cetera. And I think that it's going to be really difficult to manage all of that. We are looking at that as the potential to run out of real estate. And that's going to be a potential issue for brands and rights holders. And then the final one, which is super relevant to the prior two presentations, is around tone, messaging sensitivity, the fear of appearing tone deaf or being too self-promotional or being too commercial. Those are definitely at the forefront of the brand's concerns as we move forward. So to wrap things up, the key takeaways for us is that we know we are feeling, unfortunately, fairly confident that spending in sponsorship is going to decrease as a result of everything that we're going through, or be reevaluated altogether. We know there's no one size fits all approach. We know literally the sales model by which properties and brands interact and transact with each other has changed overnight. Some sectors will flourish based on this. I believe community-based events and things that are smaller, just by definition, will witness a little bit of a right sizing in a good way for them. And then I think we all can agree too that the pandemic is more than definitely going to change the way future partnerships are contemplated, designed, and executed. So that wraps it up. Again, thank you very much for the time. And for anyone on the webinar, please feel free to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn or through our website, which is simply named sponsorship.com. But thank you guys for the time. Hopefully I didn't take too much time away from questions.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. That's super interesting. I think, we talked about this last week. I think the top line thing I'm realizing is, I think people are realizing how much the power of the live experience matters to them right now, whether it's in sports or music or whatever. Because we're missing human connection, I think we're suddenly remembering how valuable it is. And in a way, I hope that's a silver lining for the sponsorship industry, that when things start getting back to normal, we're going to treat them as being a little bit more precious than maybe we used to as well. All right. I'm going to flip over to Bobby now to talk about some of the questions we've been getting through. Go ahead, Bobby.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. We're going to start with Neil and Jonathan. We have a question from Info Musicasa, who wants to know, if you're a startup 5 months in, who is currently building your brand, do you believe that there are specific principles we should focus on and prioritize during this time? Neil and Jonathan, you're on mute.
Yeah, the principles that we outlined in terms of actions and generosity, and that Meredith outlined in terms of inviting your community into those actions, those principles for startup brands, and you can do this quite quickly through social media and quite efficiently through social media. Those principles and actions are highly relevant to startups. The ballet shoe company that Afdel talked about is a relatively small company, highly engaged community, but its actions and community participation is the thing that allowed it to break free from its competition. So the principles are incredibly relevant to startups, and you can convene through social media.
Great, thank you. We're going to go next to Meredith. From we have a couple. One from Bokin, who wants to know, out there are many companies not just trying but being good and helpful. Is it okay as a company to stay still and let this noisy wave pass? I believe if we try to help now, we won't help that much, or help that much as we would like to. Our ticketing company in Mexico closed. We closed our curtains through March 21st. all of our content is closed, postponed, or canceled. So we're trying to maintain calm without adding something until we're really confident. So it wants to know, is it okay to kind of let this moment pass and reemerge when the dust is settled from a business standpoint?
No. I mean, I'll just say it frankly. Yeah, no, it's not. Every little bit counts and every little bit means something. And so figure out something you can do and figure out a way you can get your consumers to do it with you, which will only amplify it and make it bigger, and get on it, because there's so much that can be done and every brand and every human can play their part. So get on it.
Great, thank you. For Peter, we have a question from Jim Andrews. Beyond the near-term response from brands, do any of you, and feel free, Peter, or anyone else wants to answer, do any of you believe the current crisis will lead to a transformation in the marketing model and in the traditional roles of marketer and consumer along the lines of what Afdel and Bobby call for in Good is the New Cool?
Look, I do. Hi, Jim. I've heard your name a few times. It's good to hear your question. I honestly do think that this is going to be transformative across all elements of marketing, the marketing mix. Certainly, looking at it from a sponsorship lens, which is the live experience, which is probably affected disproportionately versus other elements of the marketing mix. I think the transformation is going to be, I've said it, wholesale. Neil said it. It's a defining moment. I mean, use whatever platitudes you want to use. I do think it's going to create wholesale change, and it's up to all of us to make that change good. I think it's going to create innovation out of necessity. People adapt when they have to adapt, and I think we as an industry have to adapt. So I'm expecting it, and I'm actually looking forward to it.
Okay, great.
Neil, do you have a point on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I echo what Peter said, really. There's so much to do now. It's very clarifying in a way for brands. Like, well, how can we make a difference? Like, there's a lot of essential things that people need help with. And I think thinking critically about your assets that your brand has at its disposal, and there's just very different ways to make a difference. Can you help people stay safe? Can you help provide essential things? Can you provide distribution? Can you help handhold people through things? I mean, just listening to Peter is fascinating. We're going to be relearning social norms after this. Like, things like going to gigs was a no-brainer before. Now it's like, I don't know whether I should go. There's going to be all these questions we're kind of relearning, like we're adolescents again, in a way. And I think that's a massive role for brands and for content. So I think when we're thinking about content strategy and these sorts of words we've been using for ages and trying to be useful, there's just actually so many more avenues now. So it's going to be harder, but also kind of easier to do great stuff.
Great, thank you.
One thing that I would encourage everybody to think about that's listening is, in a traditional marketing org at present, community management and community activation is usually quite low down in the organizational hierarchy. And what I would strongly encourage everybody who is thinking about building a 21st century marketing organization for tomorrow is that community activation and community management needs to be a senior leadership discipline at the highest level of any company's marketing org.
Love it. I love it. And Meredith, I see you giving thumbs up.
I mean, I love it. That was brilliant. And I mean, the one thing I will say we're advising people right now in the moment today is not the time to build your community and sort of acquire, right? It's not, that's the tone deaf. That's the, like, using this pandemic to build your community. And so that's what I would say in answer to, or just a nod to one of the questions around people are making fun of these communications. And I would say that's twofold. One, it's because it feels disingenuous from companies who are just sort of using this as an opportunity to pat themselves on the back. And those are the ones that don't have a built-in community, right? So all they have is that TV spot that they can say, look at us, we're doing good things. And I don't fault them for that. Keep doing the good things. But I think those are the ones that are questioned But I would also say the ones who are trying to use it to sort of acquire new community members are the ones that are being a little tone deaf. And so I could not agree with Jonathan more around the value of a community leadership team member. That should be absolutely part of your strategy coming out of this. But just focus on today, nurturing the community you have, tomorrow, building the one you should grow.
I love it. Thank you, Meredith, for addressing that. That question came from our friend Maria Ross. So Maria, thanks for sharing that. Peter, I want to come to you with a question from Patrick, who said that is not surprised to see esports rank really low on possible solutions to brands making up lost sponsorship investment. Would you agree it is because it's difficult to quantify ROI from esport viewers?
Look, I think that I was actually surprised to see that finding. I thought esports was going to sort of fall a little bit higher on the ranking overall. And I think that esports, look, I know that the motorsports community has been getting a lot of really good press around the fact that they've kind of substituted, in real life racing for some of their esports extensions, specifically in NASCAR and Formula One, which has been very, very good to see the very quick pivot and the adaptability of those leagues being able to sort of generate content and being able to sort of engage their drivers and their celebrity personalities. I think esports is still kind of developing on its own, in its own sort of sphere. And I do think that things like esports and sort of the resurgence of consuming things at home is going to, but being connected still is going to be the sort of order of the day. I think you'll see that list kind of shift around a little bit overall, but I take a little bit of a different point of view in that I thought esports was going to be a little bit higher on the list, even though I think brands are still trying to figure that space out, which is something that we work with brands on a lot in terms of trying to kind of get their heads around it in a correct and meaningful way.
Great. I have one quick question for you, Peter, and then I want to loop back the final question back to Jonathan and Neil. John Colson wanted to know, does the data that you provide, does it apply to Africa, which is mainly cash-driven economies? I don't know if there's any specific data around insights around the continent of Africa as it relates to sponsorship and investment.
No, that's a good point that I probably left out in my setup, which is that the survey that we did primarily based on speed and simplicity was US domestic only. So the data that I presented was US domestic. We have had a couple of conversations internally about the fact that a lot of the themes that came out of the survey would more than likely be relevant globally, but specifically the data that was presented today was US domestic only.
Okay, great, thank you. And Neil and Jonathan, one more question for you, and I'll turn it over to Aftel to close this out. A. Garcia shared that appreciation for sharing your point of view. Now it's clear that consumers will be looking for in the next months as we continue to live in this new reality. The question is, how can brands genuinely stand out from the crowd if every other brand will be tapping into the same values and needs in this moment?
I don't think it's a question of standing out from the crowd. I think it's a question of standing beside the crowd. And brands that are trying to stand out seem as if they're self-serving. And what we want to do is insert brands into the communities. And as Meredith has suggested, the most powerful thing that a brand can do right now the community and to helping create that help. We can be present in local communities, we can be present in statewide communities, and we can be present in national communities. For the first time ever in the history of the human race, we are all dealing with this psychological pandemic. We are all experiencing the same kind of anxiety over financial security, housing security, job security, political security. There's never been a time where the psychology of the human race all over the world is the same. And brands who are brave enough to lean into that conversation and ask the community what can they do to help, are the brands that indirectly will stand out because they're the brands that are actually getting closer to the real issues that their communities are struggling with.
Thank you. After, you want to close us out?
Yeah, thank you guys. That was a super stimulating session. Thank you for coming and sharing your vast and wise brains with us and telling us what's going on in all these worlds. I do think that's the idea of purpose may be a good place to think about leaving everybody. When you start to think about how you can help your community, your purpose as a brand starts to create a filter as to who you should look at. If you look at Lego, they're helping families. If you look at Sew Together, they're helping people who are craftspeople. You know, there's a way of actually using your purpose at this moment as a really good lens to go, okay, before I start running around doing everything with everybody, who is the group of community, as Meredith, talked about, that I can particularly be of service to? Let me start there. Let me try and find ways to engage them. So I'm not just advertising at them, but I'm asking them to help me co-create this better world that seems to be coming as well. So thank you guys for bringing all these thoughts together. It's a super interesting meeting. We're going to share this session right now, directly after this call. So all that remains is for me to say thank you very much to Peter Letts in Chicago. Thank you, Jonathan and Neil in San Francisco and London. And thank you, Meredith in New York, and Bobby in Brooklyn as well. Stay safe, look after each other, and we'll be back next week. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Yeah.